At Franklin Correctional Facility in rural Louisiana, order ruled everything. Metal doors clanked open at scheduled hours, meals were served with strict routine, and every inmate was counted twice a day like clockwork. It was the kind of place where chaos simmered on the surface, barely held back by concrete walls and iron bars. But beneath the hard steel and regulations, secrets had a way of festering, and one of them would soon explode in bloodshed. Danielle Morris was not the kind of officer you'd expect to get involved in anything scandalous. At 38, she was known as dependable, meticulous, and almost cold in her professionalism. She rarely spoke to other staff outside of brief formalities. A single mother of a 10-year-old boy, Danielle kept her world small. She clocked in, did her rounds, and clocked out. But behind her quiet demeanor was a woman who had grown tired of being invisible, tired of routine, loneliness, and the weight of responsibilities she never asked for. She had worked at Franklin for nearly 9 years. The inmates respected her, not because she was kind, but because she didn't play games. She enforced the rules with precision and without emotion. But that changed the day Jamal Rivers was transferred into Cell Block C. Jamal was everything Danielle was not. 29, tall, handsome, and charismatic in a way that could make concrete walls feel soft. He was serving a 15-year sentence for armed robbery, and rumor had it he'd been involved in at least 2 shootings that police couldn't pin on him. But what made Jamal different wasn't just his record. It was the way he moved through prison like he belonged outside it. He spoke like he had options, like this wasn't his end, just a pause. Danielle noticed him right away. Everyone did. He laughed too loudly, stared too long, and smiled like he knew your secrets before you'd spoken a word. At first, she wrote him up for talking back, for being late to lineup, for breaking curfew. But she couldn't ignore how he looked at her. Not with fear, not with resentment, with curiosity. And then came the first note. It was left folded under her clipboard after evening rounds. No name, just a line scribbled in neat handwriting. You look tired of being strong all the time. I see you. She should have reported it. She should have searched the cells and traced the handwriting. But she didn't. She folded the note and placed it in her jacket pocket and didn't speak of it again. The next one came 2 nights later. You walk like the world's on your shoulders. Let me carry it for a little while. Danielle told herself she wasn't going to respond. She wasn't going to play into this inmate's manipulative little game. But one night, after a long double shift, after missing her son's school recital because of a mandatory lockdown, she scribbled 2 words on a torn corner of paper and slid it between the bars of cell 118. Don't flatter yourself. That was how it started. What followed was a dance, subtle, coded, and dangerous. Glances across the cell block. Notes exchanged under trays in the cafeteria. Brief words exchanged when the cameras weren't pointed their way. They learned each other in fragments. Favorite foods, childhood regrets, the music that kept them sane. Jamal spoke of a daughter he hadn't seen since she was 3. Danielle spoke of marriage that died long before the divorce papers were signed. He made her laugh, not the polite chuckle she gave co-workers in the break room, but real, unguarded laughter that reminded her she was still alive, that someone saw her as more than a badge and a uniform. Eventually, the boundaries blurred. One night, Danielle found herself lingering too long in the control room, shutting down a camera feed that covered the hallway near the laundry room. She knew Jamal would be on cleaning duty that night. She walked the hallway slowly, heart pounding, and when they crossed paths, she didn't say a word. He just smiled. It wasn't until the 3rd encounter that their hands touched. Just a brush, a whisper of skin. But it was enough to ignite something both of them had tried to keep buried. They knew the risks. Relationships between staff and inmates weren't just frowned upon. They were criminal. Danielle could lose her job, her pension, her son. Jamal could lose good behavior credits, visitation, even his life if other inmates found out. But temptation doesn't care about consequences. They became skilled at hiding. They coordinated their movements. Danielle started volunteering for night shifts. Jamal found excuses to get himself reassigned to jobs near her post. She gave him a contraband phone, just for emergencies, she told herself, but they started texting late at night. The messages were brief but intimate. Did you eat? I miss your voice. One day we'll run. Somewhere nobody knows us. Danielle stopped seeing herself as an officer. She was Danielle again, a woman with dreams and desires, with a secret she clung to like a lifeline. Jamal made her feel like the version of herself she thought had died years ago. He called her Danny, a name no one else used. But inside Franklin, nothing stays hidden forever. An inmate named Luis Carter had been watching. He'd seen the looks, the missed camera footage, the brief hallway encounters. And one day, Danielle came back from break to find a note in her locker, not from Jamal, but from Luis. Heard you're keeping secrets. Secrets have a price. The fantasy began to crumble. Panic set in. Danielle started lashing out, writing up inmates for no reason, arguing with co-workers, losing sleep. Jamal tried to calm her, but his own behavior grew reckless. He began demanding more time, more favors, more chances. He wanted her to get him transferred, to file fake complaints about inmate threats to help shorten his sentence. Danielle was caught between fear and desire, between her job and her heart, between a man who made her feel alive and a system built to crush people like them. The walls around her were closing in, and with each passing day, the cost of keeping their secret would climb higher, until one night, someone would pay with their life. Danielle Morris had built her entire identity on control. Control over her emotions, control over her job, control over every part of her carefully compartmentalized life. But after months of secretly seeing Jamal Rivers behind the thick walls of Franklin Correctional Facility, that control was slipping away faster than she could grab hold. Every stolen glance, every whispered conversation, every midnight text had become a thread in a fragile web of deception, and now that web was beginning to tear. Rumors had started to spread, as they always do in prison. Inmates watched everything, and even if no one had proof yet, people were talking. Danielle could feel it. Co-workers giving her strange looks, inmates smirking when she walked by, whispers that fell silent as she entered a room. One morning, during a routine shift briefing, a sergeant joked offhandedly, "Somebody must have charmed the Ice Queen. She's been glowing lately." Danielle laughed along with the others, but her hands shook for the rest of the day. She could feel the trap closing one silent click at a time. Then came the confrontation. Luis Carter, the inmate who had previously hinted that he knew something, caught her alone in the medical wing hallway one night. "You know," he said, leaning against the wall, "a secret like yours? That's dangerous in a place like this. People die over less." Danielle's face remained blank, but her chest pounded. "Whatever you think you know," she said quietly, "you're wrong." Luis smirked. "I don't need to think. I've seen things. And I don't come cheap." She walked away, but the damage was done. The threat was real now, and it had a face. She didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Jamal, on the other hand, wasn't worried. He was emboldened. He knew Danielle wouldn't risk exposure, and he began to push, first gently, then with increasing pressure. "Transfer me out of Franklin," he said during one of their hidden meetings. "Get me to a minimum security facility. Somewhere easier, somewhere safer." She resisted. She explained she didn't have that kind of power. But Jamal wasn't interested in excuses. "If you love me," he said one night, gripping her wrist tightly, "you'll figure it out. Or maybe I should tell Internal Affairs everything. You think they'll go easy on you 'cause you cried on camera?" It was the first time his tone truly frightened her. Danielle didn't recognize the man standing in front of her anymore. The charming, wounded soul she had fallen for was gone, replaced by someone sharper, colder, manipulative. She began to wonder whether he had ever been real to begin with. Still, she couldn't walk away. She was in too deep. The phone she had smuggled in was still active, filled with texts, photos, recordings. Evidence. Jamal had leverage. He could destroy her with a few taps of a screen. And then, almost overnight, things escalated. One of the guards discovered a contraband phone in a mop bucket during a routine sweep of the janitorial area, an area Jamal had recently been assigned to. The phone was encrypted, but suspicions immediately spread. Internal Affairs launched a quiet investigation. Staff were questioned. Random phone and locker searches were carried out. Danielle played it cool. She knew how to lie. She had been doing it for months. But what she didn't anticipate was Jamal turning on her. He wanted more. He wanted a guarantee. His demand became impossible. A promise to erase records, a key to the staff entrance, threats to hurt himself and blame her if she refused. Danielle began to unravel. Her work performance faltered. She was written up for first time in nearly a decade. For being late, for losing track of an inmate during count, for unauthorized access to camera controls. It wasn't long before she was pulled into a meeting with Warden Clay. "You've changed," he said, voice low, cautious. "You were one of my best. Now you're on thin ice. What's going on?" Danielle shook her head, whispered that she was just tired. Single mom life. Stress. Nothing more. But he didn't look convinced. Then came the turning point. Jamal sent her a photo, taken inside the staff bathroom. It was of the two of them, their faces close, his hand on her waist. Danielle didn't even remember when he had taken it. The angle was sneaky, like he knew even then that he might need insurance. Along with the image came a voice note. "If I go down," he said, "you're going down with me." Danielle stared at her phone for hours that night. The image burned into her brain. She had handed her entire life over to an inmate with nothing to lose, and now he was threatening to burn it all to the ground. That's when something in her broke. She stopped thinking like a correctional officer. She stopped thinking like a mother or a woman in love or even a desperate one. She started thinking like someone with nothing left to lose. Danielle knew the blind spots in the prison better than anyone. She knew when the cameras reset. She knew where the signal was weakest. She knew which guards were lazy, which ones took extended smoke breaks. She started planning, not an escape, but an ending. She began by manipulating the schedule. She volunteered to oversee janitorial duties again, citing unfinished reorganization and a desire to redeem herself after the recent write-ups. Her request was approved. No one saw it as unusual. She'd always been a workaholic. Then she pulled a favor, switching her night shift partner with a rookie officer known to fall asleep in the control booth. Finally, she created a scenario, a maintenance issue in the sublevel hallway, a light fixture that needed checking. She had Jamal assigned to help. It was all logged. Procedures followed, at least on the surface. But what she didn't log was the moment she turned off the hallway's live camera feed. What she didn't log was a small caliber revolver she had slipped into her waistband, one that wasn't registered to the prison's armory. That night, Jamal walked into that hallway smiling, cocky, unaware that the same woman who once kissed him in the dark was about to become his executioner. Danielle's hands trembled, not with fear, but with clarity. This was the only way out, not just for her, but for her son, her job, her name. If Jamal talked, it was over. If Louise talked, it was over. If she waited one more day, it would all come crashing down. So she made a decision that couldn't be undone. One shot, behind the ear. Quick, clean. By the time officers found Jamal's body, Danielle was back in the staff locker room, wiping sweat from her forehead, face blank. She told them she found him like that. She told them she didn't hear anything. But secrets, no matter how deep you bury them, have a way of clawing back to the surface. And Danielle Morris's secret was about to drag her into a nightmare far worse than any she thought she had escaped. For a few brief hours after the gunshot echoed to the sublevel hallway of Franklin Correctional Facility, Danielle Morris believed she had done the unthinkable and gotten away with it. Jamal Rivers was gone. The secret that had been threatening to destroy her life was now silenced. One bullet, one moment of cold clarity, and the most dangerous piece of evidence, a living, breathing man with a mind full of receipts, was erased. She returned to the staff wing with practice calm, wiping her hands clean in the employee restroom and removing the burner phone from her pocket. She crushed it beneath the heel of her boot and dropped the shards in separate trash bins. But no matter how composed she looked on the outside, the walls were already beginning to tremble around her. Less than 20 minutes after she rejoined her post, a panic call came through on the radio. Code red. Inmate down. Sublevel corridor. Danielle answered without hesitation. Copy that. Heading there now. By the time she arrived, the scene was chaos. A rookie officer, barely 2 months into the job, had stumbled upon the body while completing a last-minute sweep. Jamal lay face down on the concrete, a small pool of blood darkening the floor beneath his head. His arms were outstretched, his body eerily still. There were no witnesses, no surveillance footage, no defensive wounds, no weapon found at the scene. It was, to the casual observer, a mystery. But to those who knew Franklin, who understood the prison's ecosystem, its rumors, its ever-present whispers, it was something far worse, a message. The inmate population was quick to respond. Some celebrated. Jamal had enemies. Others went quiet, retreating to corners of the yard and refusing to speak to staff. Luis Carter, the inmate who had threatened Danielle, was suddenly nowhere to be found. He was moved to solitary 2 hours later for his own protection. And behind it all, Danielle watched the investigation unfold with a mixture of fear and fascination. Warden Clay called for a full lockdown. Internal Affairs was brought in. The hallway was sealed off, photographs taken, blood samples bagged. The forensics team combed every inch for fingerprints, fibers, residue. Danielle offered a statement, brief, concise, cold. I last saw inmate Rivers near the janitorial wing at 7:15 p.m. He was due for routine maintenance duty. I checked in at 7:20. At 7:38, I heard the code red alert. Did you notice anything suspicious during your rounds? The investigator asked. She shook her head. Nothing out of the ordinary. But the cracks were already showing. Her shift partner, the same rookie who had been sleeping in the control room, confessed that he had dozed off for nearly 45 minutes during the critical window of Jamal's death. That meant the only person with unchecked access to the sublevel corridor was Danielle. Still, there was no physical evidence. The gun was gone. Danielle had wiped everything down. She had rehearsed her answers. Her alibi, though thin, had just enough shape to survive scrutiny, for now. Then came the autopsy report. Jamal had been shot at close range, execution style, with a small caliber weapon, likely a revolver. No gunpowder on his hands. No signs of a struggle. The kill had been precise, clean, methodical. This wasn't inmate-on-inmate violence. This was personal. And the moment that realization hit, the temperature inside the warden's office dropped several degrees. Warden Clay called Danielle back in, this time without a pretense of formality. You want to tell me what the hell's going on? He asked, voice low, eyes heavy with suspicion. Danielle held her ground. I don't know what you're insinuating, sir. Clay leaned forward. You've been off for weeks. Everyone sees it. You've had shifts pulled, mistakes logged, warnings filed. And now the inmate, everyone said you were too close to turns up dead in a hallway you were assigned to. I'm not stupid, Danielle. She stared back, her voice trembling slightly. Neither am I. But the investigation wasn't just happening on paper. In the background, Internal Affairs had quietly pulled Danielle's phone records. They found deleted messages, suspicious contact patterns, and most damning of all, traces of another device previously linked to her iCloud login. The burner phone. They searched her locker, her car, her apartment. At home, they found a second prepaid SIM card hidden inside a coffee tin. Inside her closet, tucked behind winter coats, was a pistol case, empty, wiped clean, but traceable by serial number to a small firearm Danielle had purchased legally 7 years ago. That gun had never been registered with the department, and it matched the caliber used in Jamal's murder. The walls, once slowly closing in, were now collapsing. But what truly broke the case wasn't the phone data. It wasn't the missing weapon. It wasn't even the blood splatter analysis that placed the shooter less than 3 feet from the victim. It was the one thing Danielle hadn't planned for. Jamal's daughter. A woman named Naomi Rivers showed up at the prison 2 days after the murder, demanding answers. She hadn't seen her father since she was 6, but had recently reconnected through phone calls. She told investigators her father had confided in her that he was involved with a female guard and was planning to leverage that relationship to secure an early release. He had sent Naomi copies of messages, audio recordings, and, most importantly, that same blurry photograph taken in the staff bathroom. Naomi turned over the phone willingly. When Internal Affairs reviewed the files, there was no longer any room for doubt. One message, recorded the night before Jamal's death, played in Danielle's voice. "You don't understand what I've already risked. If this goes bad, we're both dead." They arrested Danielle Morris 3 days later. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word. As she sat in the back of the cruiser, handcuffed, staring at the prison gates disappearing behind her, only one thought echoed in her mind, louder than guilt, louder than fear. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Danielle Morris sat in a cold, windowless interrogation room at the Louisiana State Bureau of Investigation, her hands cuffed to a metal table. Her hair was tied back neatly, her uniform gone, replaced with a county-issued orange jumpsuit that still smelled like bleach. On the outside, she looked composed. Inside, the unraveling had already begun. Across from her sat Special Agent Terrence Calloway, a seasoned investigator with sharp instincts and a reputation for peeling back even the tightest lies. The case had landed in his lap after the warden called in the state, realizing the prison could no longer handle the scandal brewing in its basement. Agent Calloway opened a manila folder and slid a photograph across the table. It was a now infamous image. Danielle, her head tilted toward Jamal Rivers, his hand resting possessively at her hip. A blurry, clandestine photo, taken just a few feet from where she now sat as a suspect in his murder. Danielle didn't flinch. She didn't blink, but the silence that followed was louder than any confession. "We have phone records, surveillance gaps, text messages, voice notes. We have a motive, an opportunity, and evidence that places you in that hallway at the exact time Jamal was shot." Calloway said flatly, "This is your chance to speak." Danielle stared at the image again. "He was going to ruin my life," she finally said. And just like that, the walls of silence began to crack. Over the following days, investigators pieced together a timeline so damning that even the most loyal officers at Franklin Correctional couldn't defend her. The contraband phone recovered from Naomi Rivers, the inmate's estranged daughter, contained dozens of messages that told the story in Danielle's own words. They traced her shift logs, discovered manual overrides to security cameras, and found gaps in guard logs that lined up with the exact windows of their secret meetings. They subpoenaed GPS data from Danielle's personal phone, matching her proximity to off-limit areas at crucial times. But what shocked investigators the most wasn't just the affair. It was how long it had gone on. Nearly 8 months. 8 months of hidden communications, falsified reports, and smuggled items. From food to medication to personal photos. Danielle had compromised the integrity of the prison security system and risked not only her own career, but the lives of other officers. Several staff members admitted off-record that they had suspected something. A few even hinted they knew but didn't report it, afraid of retaliation or because they didn't want to get involved. As pressure mounted, Internal Affairs extended the investigation to 4 other correctional officers, probing whether any had assisted or knowingly ignored Danielle's behavior. Meanwhile, Jamal's death became headline news. Inmate killed amid rumors of affair with officer. Was it passion or power? Louisiana prison scandal deepens. The media swarmed Franklin Correctional Facility. Civil rights groups called for a full audit. Families of other inmates began questioning whether similar misconduct had taken place with their loved ones. The prison was put under temporary oversight. Every camera, every logbook, every disciplinary record was scrutinized. But as the outside world exploded with outrage, Danielle's world grew smaller. Prosecutors wasted no time. The evidence was overwhelming, and they announced formal charges. First-degree murder, abuse of power, criminal conspiracy, and destruction of state property. She was denied bail. At her first court appearance, she appeared without makeup, her face pale and eyes sunken. When the judge read the charges, she barely blinked. The courtroom was filled with reporters, Jamal's daughter Naomi sitting stone-faced in the front row. She held up the phone that had brought Danielle down, silent, damning proof of a mother's destruction and a daughter's vengeance. Danielle's defense attorney tried to argue for diminished responsibility, claiming emotional manipulation, a toxic power dynamic, and psychological stress from years of overwork and single motherhood. But the prosecution pushed back hard. She wasn't manipulated. The DA said during a press briefing, she was in control the entire time. She shut off cameras. She coordinated schedules. She lied in official records. And when it all threatened to unravel, she made a calculated decision to kill. Behind the scenes, more damning evidence surfaced. Ballistics confirmed that the bullet pulled from Jamal's skull matched Danielle's missing .38 revolver. DNA samples found a single strand of her hair on the collar of Jamal's shirt. Her internet history, recovered from an old laptop, included chilling searches. How to disable prison cameras. Where to shoot someone to kill instantly. Do inmates talk to media? There was no way out. No twist. No hidden accomplice. Just a woman who thought she could bury the truth with a single bullet. But what haunted investigators most weren't just the fact of the case. It was how eerily calm Danielle remained throughout it all. During her psychological evaluation, she said something the court psychiatrist would later repeat under oath. I knew I had to choose him or everything I'd built, so I chose myself. And in choosing herself, she shattered everything. The exposure didn't end with Danielle's arrest. The prison underwent a full systemic overhaul. Several ranking officers were suspended, and one resigned amid claims he had once warned Danielle privately about her unusual closeness with Jamal and never filed a formal complaint. A memo leaked to the press revealed that 2 previous sexual misconduct claims involving staff had been quietly settled within the past 5 years, neither involving Danielle, but both pointing to a culture of silence and cover-up. The fallout reached the state legislature. Reform bills were introduced demanding stricter oversight of correctional staff, mandatory psychological screening, and the installation of third-party auditing systems inside all state-run prisons. Activists called it the Jamal Rivers Law. Inside prison walls, inmates who once envied Jamal's closeness to a guard now shook their heads in silence. He thought he had her under control. One inmate said anonymously, but he forgot the golden rule in here. Never fall for a guard. They got more to lose. By the time Danielle's trial date was officially set, she had already become a symbol, not of passion, but of power corrupted, of lines crossed, of silence weaponized. And while she waited in her own cell, now on the other side of the bars, every minute ticked by with the slow certainty that the final chapter of her story had already been written. But the world was still watching, and justice was just beginning. The trial of Danielle Morris began under heavy security in the East Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse. Reporters packed the gallery. Civil rights groups, prison watchdog organizations, and grieving families of former inmates all had eyes fixed on the woman once trusted to guard the very institution she betrayed. Danielle walked into the courtroom in shackles, head held high, eyes blank. No tears, no emotion. It was the same cold composure she had shown when interrogated, when arrested, and even when the charges were read aloud again. First-degree murder, abuse of power, criminal conspiracy, destruction of state property, obstruction of justice. The prosecution made one thing clear from the start. This was not just about a forbidden affair. This was about the abuse of institutional power, a deliberate murder, and a desperate attempt to bury the truth before it destroyed her. In his opening statement, District Attorney Warren Bell said it plainly. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a calculated execution carried out by someone who knew every blind spot in the system, because she helped build those blind spots. They laid out the evidence methodically. The contraband phone, trace of Danielle's shift, text messages, audio recordings, and voice memos from Jamal and Danielle. The forged logs showing tampered camera systems and altered inmate assignments. The missing revolver, traced back to Danielle's gun purchase in 2018, now matching the caliber of the bullet recovered from Jamal's skull. Security badge overrides, revealing unauthorized entry into restricted areas the night of the murder. But the most powerful testimony came from Naomi Rivers, Jamal's 22-year-old daughter. Dressed in black, she took the stand with trembling hands but a steady voice. She told the jury how her father had re-entered her life just months before his death, how he spoke often of a woman on the inside who was going to change everything. Naomi recited word for word the last message she ever received from her father. By next week, I'm going to be free. I promise. I just gotta get her to do one more thing. That one more thing was never clarified, but prosecutors argued it was likely a demand that pushed Danielle over the edge, possibly involving forged parole papers or a request for an escape plan. The defense, led by attorney Carla De Vere, attempted to shift the narrative. Yes, Danielle and Jamal were involved, she admitted, but this was not premeditated murder. It was panic. It was coercion. It was a woman being blackmailed, manipulated, used. She was vulnerable, Carla told the jury. He had evidence. He was threatening to expose her and ruin her life. She snapped, but the jury didn't buy it. Not after listening to Danielle's own voice in the recordings. Not after seeing the hours of preparation, the changes in prison schedules, the strategically timed camera outages. The killing wasn't impulsive. It was clinical. After just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Danielle didn't flinch. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent. No applause. No tears. Just the hollow sound of justice being served. Too late to save a life. As Danielle was let out, Naomi Rivers stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. In interviews later, she said, "I didn't get my dad back. Not really. But I made sure she couldn't erase him like he never existed. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine." The aftermath of the trial sent shockwaves through Louisiana's correctional system. 3 officers at Franklin were fired for negligence. 2 more resigned before they could be questioned. Internal Affairs launched a broader investigation into staff-inmate relationships across the state, resulting in dozens of disciplinary actions, policy changes, and mandatory ethics retraining for all correctional employees. Warden Clay was placed on administrative leave and eventually retired quietly. The state legislature passed new protocols, unofficially dubbed the Rivers Reform. All correctional officers must now undergo quarterly psychological evaluations. Body cams were introduced for staff on certain shifts. A third-party civilian ethics board was formed to oversee prisons with histories of misconduct. Meanwhile, Danielle Morris was transferred to a high-security women's facility outside Shreveport, the same kind of institution where she once wielded power and silence like weapons. Now, she lived on the other side of the bars, watched and whispered about, just like the inmates she used to control. Her son, just 10 years old when she was arrested, was placed in the custody of his aunt in Texas. He has never publicly spoken about his mother. Friends say he no longer uses her last name. From behind bars, Danielle has reportedly refused every interview. She has not issued a public apology. Not to Naomi, not to the prison, not to her family. But in the end, the silence said enough. She crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And in trying to protect her secret, she traded her freedom, her career, and her soul for the illusion of control. The affair may have started in shadows, but it ended in blood, courtroom verdicts, and the echoing lesson that no one, not even a gatekeeper, can outrun the truth forever. If this story left you speechless, you're not alone. Behind every headline is a family shattered, a truth buried, and a secret waiting to be exposed. Subscribe to Family Crime Exposed for more shocking, true crime stories that reveal the darkness hiding behind closed doors, betrayal, obsession, revenge, and the twisted bonds that destroy lives. Don't just watch. Uncover the truth with us. Hit like, drop a comment, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next chilling episode. Because in the end, it's always the ones closest to you